In weather as cold as -20 degrees Celsius, the woman forced herself to take off her top. Then she pulled down her pants as well, leaving herself in nothing but her underwear and shoes. The freezing wind cut into her exposed skin, making her whole body shake violently, but she did not hesitate for even a moment. Gritting her teeth and enduring the cold, she stepped straight into the icy lake. After only a few careful steps, the ground suddenly disappeared beneath her feet. The unexpected depth sent a wave of panic through her, and she began to sink. The sudden drop and the merciless cold closing over her head shocked her badly. She thrashed in fear and quickly swam back toward the shore. Standing there, trembling uncontrollably, she realized that walking straight into the lake was not going to work. Thinking fast, she gathered several wooden logs scattered along the shore and pushed them into the water. Using them as support, she entered the lake again. This time she clung tightly to one floating log and managed to keep herself afloat. Slowly and carefully she moved farther toward the middle of the lake. Her goal was clear, the supplies and the satellite phone still inside the sunken plane. When she reached the wreckage, she took one deep, steady breath and dove down. The deeper she went, the more intense the cold became. Inside the murky wreckage, her hands searched desperately through broken pieces and floating debris. She was frantically looking for the satellite phone, but she could not find it. Her lungs began to burn, and the pressure in her chest kept rising. Knowing she could not hold her breath much longer, she grabbed 2 backpacks lying nearby and used all her remaining strength to swim back up. She burst through the surface, gasping desperately for air. The sun was shining above, but after spending so long in the freezing water, her body had almost gone numb. Her arms and legs felt heavy and sluggish. Even so, she held onto the log and kept moving toward shore. Then suddenly, a deep roar shattered the silence behind her. Turning around, she saw a brown bear tearing through her campsite. The huge animal ripped apart what little supplies she had left. It found the last of her food and swallowed everything, packaging and all. Then, it moved aside, leaving behind only a steaming pile of waste, a horrible reminder of her loss. After that, the bear noticed the lifeless body of her companion. Terrified, she began slapping the water, shouting and splashing, hoping to scare it away. But instead of running, the bear seemed curious. Almost mockingly, it picked up her companion's severed arm in its mouth. A little later, perhaps no longer hungry, it slowly wandered back into the forest. When she finally reached shore, she dragged herself onto the ground, exhausted and shaking. First, she buried her companion. Only after that did she return to camp and inspect the backpacks she had recovered from the plane. The first bag contained only tablets, charging cables, sewing kits, glasses, and a few small items, completely useless in her current situation. But the second bag was stuffed with neatly bundled $100 bills. Under normal circumstances, it would have been a fortune, but stranded in the wilderness, it was nothing more than a pile of useless paper. Money meant nothing here. What she needed now was drinkable water and food. The lake water nearby was dirty and unsafe, so it had to be boiled. She gathered a stack of banknotes and arranged them into a small pile. Using her glasses, she focused the sunlight carefully until a thin line of smoke began rising from the money. Gradually she added dry twigs, and eventually a steady fire came to life. Then she found a bent piece of metal from the plane wreckage. Using a rock, she hammered it into the shape of a makeshift container. She filled it with lake water and balanced it over the fire. She waited until the water was boiling hard. Once the metal cooled, she carefully poured the boiled water into the bottles she had brought back. For the moment, her drinking water problem was solved. But food was still a problem. She pulled some thread from the sewing kit and tied it tightly to a wooden stick. Since she did not have a proper hook, she fastened one of her earrings to the end to use as a makeshift one. Standing knee-deep in the water, she waited patiently. Surprisingly, a fish eventually bit. But the moment she tried to pull it in, the weak thread snapped, and the fish vanished back into the depths. Fishing proved unreliable, so she headed into the forest to search for food instead. Not far from camp, she found bushes covered in wild berries of different colors. She picked them carefully, sorted them by type, and brought some back with her. Choosing one variety, she tasted it very carefully. At first, nothing seemed wrong, so she ate more. But that was a mistake. The berries were poisonous. Soon her stomach began twisting violently. All night long she vomited and writhed in pain. Her body grew weak and dehydrated. The next morning, pale and exhausted, she examined the bear droppings she had seen earlier. She carefully compared them to the berries she had collected and noticed similarities in the color and texture of the pulp. The bear had eaten those particular berries without any harm. Still cautious, she ate only a very small amount and waited. When she did not get sick, she confirmed that they were safe. Relieved, she collected a much larger amount of edible berries. At the same time, light raindrops began falling from the sky. Realizing the opportunity, she quickly placed all her bottles and containers outside to collect rainwater. By evening, they were full. As she started gathering them, she noticed a faint light glowing in the distance. At night, light could mean only one thing: people. For the first time in days, hope surged through her chest. Early the next morning, she packed what little she had and set off in the direction of that distant light. Her heart pounded with excitement. She was sure rescue might finally be close. Then she spotted something on the ground, what looked like fresh footprints. Excited, she began following them, thinking they would lead her to other survivors. but after walking some distance, she suddenly came upon a plastic bag lying on the ground. It looked familiar. It was the same bag she had left the night before. She froze. Slowly she looked around and recognized more scattered bags. A cold truth settled over her. Panicking, she checked the soles of her shoes and compared them to the tracks in the dirt. They matched perfectly. The footprints she had been following were her own. In fact, just one day earlier, she had been traveling in a private plane with her boyfriend, but during the flight, the plane suddenly lost control and crashed into the nearby lake. When the woman regained consciousness, she found herself hanging upside down, still strapped into her seat, while water rapidly flooded the cockpit. Trembling with fear, she unbuckled herself and somehow managed to get out. Then she moved toward the pilot's seat and tried to unfasten his seatbelt, but she was struck by another shock. Her boyfriend had already opened the plane door and jumped out by himself. She was stunned. The man who had always claimed to love her and care for her had left her behind to die. But she had no time to dwell on it, because the water was rising fast. She immediately tried to save the pilot, but she did not know the metal rod had pierced through his leg. He was struggling with all his strength to free himself, but he could not get loose. The water kept rising. At last, the pilot gave up and told her to save herself and leave. Hiding her fear and pain, she turned and swam toward the surface. As soon as she came up, gasping for air, she saw her boyfriend shouting for help. Then she remembered that he could not swim. Even though she was angry with him, she still decided to save him. She reached him, grabbed hold of him, and dragged him to shore with all her strength. Exhausted, the woman collapsed onto the ground, thinking everything would now be all right, but the real nightmare was only beginning. A while later, when she tried to wake her boyfriend, she noticed that his face had turned pale and his body had become ice cold. Panic ran through her. She checked him and found that a piece of metal had become lodged in his thigh, and blood was flowing from the wound. She tried to pull the metal out with her hand, but the instant she touched the wound, her boyfriend screamed in pain. Frightened and not knowing what else to do, she quickly removed her belt and tied it tightly above the wound to slow the bleeding. But that was only a temporary solution. Without proper treatment, he could die. She immediately pulled out her phone and tried to call the police, but there was no signal. The call would not connect. Then she used her boyfriend's phone, but it had the same problem. No network at all. After that, she ran into the forest, hoping to find a signal somewhere. She climbed to the top of a hill, but all around her there was only dense forest, and still no service. Seeing that, she felt completely hopeless. But the next day brought an even greater shock. In the morning, when she saw her boyfriend lying motionless on the ground, fear gripped her. She rushed to him, touched him, and found that his body was cold as ice, and he was no longer breathing. The repeated blows shattered her from within. She began wondering how she would go on living now. For a moment, she thought about dying beside him too. But then she remembered the child growing inside her. The moment she thought of her unborn baby, strength returned to her. She changed her mind and decided that for her child's sake, she would stay alive no matter what. The next day, the woman tried to leave the forest with all her belongings, but the forest was like a maze. No matter how far she went, she always ended up back in the same place. Exhausted and discouraged, she sat under a tree and wondered what to do next. Then her eyes fell on her bag, and an idea came to her. She took out her expensive laptop and then realized she could use her things to mark her path through the forest. She threw bundles of cash onto the ground and moved forward, dropping money piece by piece through the woods like trash so she could remember the route. But after wandering all day, she realized she had once again returned to the same place. Now she understood that without a map or proper sense of direction, escaping the forest was impossible. Defeated and exhausted, she returned to her camp. From her bag, she took out a steel needle and rubbed it against the magnet in her watch to magnetize it. Then she placed the needle in her earplug, creating a simple homemade compass. She was overjoyed. She believed that now she would finally be able to get out of the forest. But she had no idea that an even greater danger was waiting for her. Suddenly, she heard strange sounds behind her. Terrified, she started running. But while fleeing, her foot slipped and she fell into a deep pit. She had no idea how long she remained unconscious. When she woke up, she saw that the lower half of her body was trapped under a large rock. She tried to move it, but a sharp pain suddenly shot through her head. She touched it and realized that her scalp had split open and was bleeding. Immediately, she took a scarf from her bag and tied it tightly around her head. For the moment, she managed to steady herself. But trapped under the rock, she could not move at all. She became completely desperate and was on the verge of giving up. Then she remembered the baby growing inside her. Thinking of her child, she kept telling herself again and again that she had to get out of there no matter what. She picked up a small stone lying nearby and began trying to chip away at the larger rock. She did not know how long she kept at it. Her hands went numb, but a mother's love kept giving her strength. It seemed almost impossible, but eventually she noticed that she had managed to create a small hole beneath the rock. Now she could pull her leg free through it. Gathering all her strength, she finally succeeded in freeing herself. She lay on the ground and took a deep breath, realizing that she was still alive. But the real problem started then. When she tried to get out of the pit, she saw that the opening was far above her. All around her were smooth, slippery rock walls. It would have been difficult even for a healthy person to climb out, and her leg was badly injured. Now she was completely broken. She looked at the picture of her unborn child and burst into tears. It felt as if, after everything she had endured, she was still trapped. In anger, she grabbed a stone nearby and hurled it at the wall with all her strength. But surprisingly, the impact created a small hole in the wall. She did not waste any time. She immediately started crawling through that opening. After a huge struggle, she finally managed to escape from the pit. Now, using a wooden stick for support, she limped forward through the forest. For the next several days, she kept walking. Whenever she became too tired, she stopped to rest. Whenever she was hungry, she ate wild fruit she found along the way. After many days, she finally found a way out of the forest. She felt that she had truly been saved at last. But in front of her was a fast-flowing river. Once again, she sat down in despair, unsure what to do. Then she thought that perhaps if she let the current carry her forward, she might eventually find help. She picked up a piece of wood, threw it into the water, held onto it, and slowly floated out toward the middle of the river. She kept moving with the current. But when the river made a sharp turn, her hand slipped from the wood. Now she struggled just to keep her head above water so she would not drown. At that very moment, 2 people spotted her. They immediately ran toward her and rescued her in time. The woman survived. Once again, she had defeated death and stayed alive. 6 months later, she arrived at a hospital with her father. There, she gave birth to a healthy baby. Looking at that innocent little child, the one she had risked her life to save, her eyes filled with tears. She promised herself that she would never let this child suffer in any way.